First man, third box office. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is a right angle on the Ryan Gosling big budget space thriller about, it's a biopic about Neil Armstrong, who, one small step for a man, was on the moon. Just one of the most historic achievements in human history, and certainly for this country, and it came in third behind two movies that had already been out for a week. What was it? Venom and A Star is Born. They were expecting $20 to $24 million. They got 16 instead, and a lot of people are blaming the fact that they left out the part where Neil Armstrong planted the American flag on the lunar soil. Bill, you said in our pre-show meeting that you've already seen the movie and that leaving out the flag was not a big deal to you. What part was it that left you so disappointed?
Well, first of all, there's a lot to say about that. I want to make it clear that I didn't give any money to this. I paid for 2 tickets to Venom, and then I just walked into the other theater. So I want to maintain the purity of the boycott, and I hope there was a boycott, and I hope it had some effect. The film is so sparse, in a good way. In terms of filmmaking, it's a really interesting take on things. You know, it's just everything is super close-ups of eyes and instruments and stuff. And when I see what actually happened on the moon, because I was beating this drum louder than anybody when I heard that they'd shot it and then they cut it out. But I was looking at it as more of a kind of a documentary, more of a documentary style telling of what happened when they got on the moon. But by the time Neil's on the moon, you know, it's all like an internal thing. You know what I mean? It's all kind of like an internal thing. What's going on in his mind? There's no documentary aspect to it. So I didn't miss the flag raising because there were a lot of things they didn't show on the moon, and things that they did show on the moon, I have no memory of happening. But nevertheless, there you go. So it didn't bother me. And I should say, just for the sake of this, that you watch this movie and there's no question which country sent this rocket to the moon. So there's nothing anti-American in it. There's no pretending like you see United States. You see people waving flags. As a matter of fact, at the very end, they cut to one of the actual interviews that happened on the streets around the world when the moon landing actually happened. You know, they didn't recreate this. And it was a French woman saying, "Oh, you know," and she said, "Well, how do you feel about Americans landing on the moon?" She said, "Oh, I always knew the Americans would do it. I always had confidence that they would do it." And I thought that was a nice little touch. So the things that I was angry about, I'm not so angry about now. But the things that I didn't expect to be angry about, I'm a little angry about. Not even angry, just disappointed. I suppose it's well known now to people, certainly been watching me for a while, that Neil Armstrong is my lifelong idol. He's the one person throughout my entire life I've admired more than any other human being on this earth. So that's why I went to see the movie, because I just had to see it. And the first thing I said to my wife as I came out of there was, I didn't like Neil Armstrong very much.
Well, you didn't like Ryan Gosling.
I didn't like. Yeah. Well, I didn't like the Neil Armstrong in the movie very much. In fact, I didn't like him at all, and I think that's why the movie's failed. And I think you get that sense in the trailers that they cut, because when they cut to the trailers, Ryan Gosling always has this kind of, I'm going to internalize the fear, you know, kind of look, and there's never any sense of what I took Neil Armstrong to be. Now, I don't doubt for a second that Neil Armstrong was one of the least emotional people who ever lived. My wife had a profound thing to say about that. She said, when you are constantly venturing that far into the realm of death, you have to be mostly dead yourself, or else you can't stand the shock of it. Wow. Coming back and forth. I thought, wow. And that's a pretty good way of putting it, because this guy's constantly risking his life. But here's what I didn't like about the movie. I never saw Neil Armstrong as a man overcome his fear and use his training and his intellect to solve a problem, which is what happened on the Gemini 8 mission, which is what happened on him ejecting from the lunar landing simulator. It's what happened when he was facing a field of boulders and was down to 1%, 2% fuel, 15, 20 seconds of fuel they landed with on Apollo 11, something like, maybe less. And I never saw the when I say cool, I don't mean cool like Fonzie cool. I mean just cool like, okay, I'm a human being, and I'm about to crash into the moon, and that's a scary thing. But I'm also Neil frickin' Armstrong, and now it's my time to figure out how to get this thing on the ground before we run out of fuel. I never saw that. There were constant moments in the movie where you can see just vibration. They overdid the vibration by a factor of 100. But there was never a moment when I saw Neil's eyes calm. I saw him not panicked, and I saw other people around him either passed out or freaked out, but I never saw him take control of the situation. And the other thing I despised about the movie was I never saw him smile either. They really should have called it First Robot. First Robot would have been a good title for this, because what they're basically trying to say was he was so internal that no one connected to him. And he didn't connect to his children and his wife, and then this whole backstory about having lost a daughter, and I didn't even know that, to be honest with you. But I just didn't like him, Steve, and that to me is not just a failure for me as a lifelong idol of Neil Armstrong. I think that's why the movie failed, and I think when you look at the trailers, you don't get the feeling like, hey, I really want to know this guy. You get the feeling of, wow, this guy went through some serious stuff, but it's never like, This is the title First Man is obviously play on First Man to the Moon, but the entire idea of the title is he was the first man of humanity. He was the most manly man in the world, and I maintain that to this day that he was. So the essence of him is not there. I will say one thing of great positivity towards this film, and that is this: I've been a space guy my whole life. I've ridden in experimental airplanes. I've been in mock-ups of real spaceships. I've done all of it. I've worn real spacesuits and so on. And not until I saw this movie did I connect the experiences of space flight with experiences that I've had as my own, as a pilot on my own. And what I mean by that is this: in this movie, when it starts off with him in the X-15, and all you see is that kind of fairing that connected the X-15 below the wing of the B-52, and the thing is just going, and it's just, and you can see the thing just vibrating. And I thought, oh my God, that's exactly what it must have been like, And then when the Gemini launches, it's like, my God, this thing it's this thing. It's going to shake itself to pieces. It's just going to shake itself to pieces, and it's creaking and it's groaning, and They overdid the vibration, but that sense of the fragility of these spacecraft and the metal bending, creaking sound of these things being under loads that they were just barely able to take was a profoundly good, I think by far the most visceral sense of the danger of it that I've ever had, and to that degree, I loved it. But in terms of the astronauts, I didn't like any of them, and I kind of think you should. I certainly like them in real life, and if you've got a movie about one man, and you don't capture anything about that man that you like, you've got a failure of a movie. Patton was a pretty controversial guy, and there was a lot of things you could say negative about Patton. But Patton the movie is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I love Patton in the movie, warts and all.
Well, yeah, that was the thing. He was a martinet. He could be abusive and all the rest, but it all tied into his character.
George C. Scott made me love that man.
Yeah.
And there's none of that in First Man.
Oh, that's Scott Bill made me think of something. Well, actually, two somethings. You're our favorite storyteller out of this troika here, and there are two much better space race movies. One is The Right Stuff, and the other is Apollo 13. Bill, what you were saying about what that visceral thing you got from First Man, I get from that Apollo 13 launch sequence. My wife and I watch that about once a year, and every time it just grabs you by the throat.
I don't want to monopolize things more than I always do, but I just have to say this. In Apollo 13, you liked everybody. You got Tom Hanks, and you're rooting for Tom Hanks. Gary Sinise, who I've had the pleasure of getting to know pretty well, is fantastic. You love them all. And in The Right Stuff, you've got a story about 7 individual guys. They really focused on 3 or 4. Glenn, Shepard, and Cooper, pretty much. And the other guys were
Grissom
kind of
got some good screen time.
Sorry, so there were 4: Grissom, Shepard, Cooper, and Glenn, and Slayton, and oh God, I know the other Carpenter, and they're there. But even they have interesting things to do. But you love these guys. You know, you loved them. You get Dennis Quaid driving a red convertible across the desert. Like, who's the best pilot you ever saw? And how do you not love that guy? You know, and Glenn is so clean cut and such a Boy Scout. And Shepard's like, you know, the first time you meet Shepard, it's like, here you guys have something that sounds really dangerous. Yes, it's extremely dangerous. I'm in. You know, it's the essence of these guys.
They were cowboys with spaceships.
Yes, and it was the essence of them, and when the director says that Neil Armstrong wasn't very patriotic, that was much more offensive to me. That was in response to the flag thing. Much more offensive to me than not showing the flag planting, because you have to ask yourself what is it that these guys are doing it for? Because it's not a death wish. You can't survive if you have a death wish, because you have plenty of opportunities to meet that wish. It's a very interesting personality type, and I didn't get any of it in this movie. Sorry to say.
That's a shame. Scott, I promise you a question I'm going to deliver. So we have these 2 much better space movies that did get us to love these guys, and I think one of the reasons I love The Right Stuff so much is you had a great combination of this almost surreal absurdity of the U.S. government and these engineers and these astronauts making it work anyway. And in Apollo 13, you didn't need a bunch of flag-waving patriotism, because every single frame of that movie is just saturated with can-do American spirit. And it's so much fun to watch. So at some point along the creative process, you as a storyteller have got to think, what are we going to do to salvage this movie at the end to make people like this very difficult character that we've created, maybe out of whole cloth. As a storyteller, Scott, where do you go wrong, and why don't you correct it along the way somewhere?
You know, it's amazing, and I have not seen the movie, and frankly, in my memory, I'm not sure I've ever seen Apollo 13 or The Right Stuff. Although I believe
brilliant films.
I read The Right Stuff, and from Bill's description of this movie, it occurs to me that as a movie, it sounds like it would make a pretty good novel. Because if they did the whole thing sort of internally, inside the guy's head...
It's based on a book.
Yeah, you can do that in a novel. You can have a lot of the sort of self-talk that goes on inside the character's head that doesn't play well on screen. On screen, you've got to show it. Now, I could excuse them if they were literally attempting to make a documentary, in which case I would say, just the facts, ma'am. Tell the story as it actually happened. I don't expect you to make something of the man that he wasn't. I don't expect you to create something that wasn't. But you're not doing that. This is not a documentary, and it's not a novel. This is a movie. In this movie, you are taking into your hands one of the most precious myths of Americana. And I don't mean that in a myth in the sense of a false story. I mean one of the sort of prime narratives, the iconic moments in American history. And you have a responsibility of human history, yes. But you have a responsibility to the story. And you have a responsibility to the audience. And I would say also you have a responsibility to the American people, if you're going to do this and spend all that money, to not just live out your little fantasy about some side element that you think is really fascinating of this guy's inner struggle. Now, that said, make any crappy movie you want. I don't have to go see it.
That's right.
Or I can watch it on something, some service that I'm paying $11 a month already for when it eventually gets to my house. It just makes you wonder, if they can put a man on the moon, why can't they make a $200 million movie that's worth going to see?
Yeah, if they can put a man on the moon, why can't they make a movie about putting a man on the moon?
Exactly.
Great.
Folks, let me tell you why the flag thing actually does bother me. I'm glad it's apparently not such a big deal in the movie. But the space race was a part of the Cold War. And the Cold War was more than just, America versus Russia. It had meaning. And the meaning was liberty versus oppression. It was a real life death struggle between the best in man and the absolute worst in man, as represented by these two massive countries. And the space race was a huge part, at least in the propaganda war, on who was going to win. And not only did we win the race to the moon, but we left two things there other than the legs of the lunar lander. We left the American flag, and we also left a plaque. And on that plaque, it says the date and that Americans came to the moon and set foot. But it says, the plaque says, "We came in peace for all mankind." And that's a really American thing to do. Not just to plant the flag to say, yes, we're Americans and we came here, but to say that we did this for all mankind. The liberty-loving best in mankind did this. And I think if you're going to tell sort of a dour story about a man who has internalized absolutely everything, then you've got to reward the audience at the end by showing them both of those things. And if you leave that out, then you really take the meaning out of Apollo. And what a criminal thing to do. What a sad thing to do. Maybe I'll watch this one on Netflix, but for right now, I think I'm going to give it a pass. That's your right angle on that. I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. The show's made possible by the members of BillWhittle.com. If you like what you see, please click on over. We'd love to have you aboard. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.